So, Dipthi, you'd spoken a little before about the different types of yoga, but can you just go a little more into depth here? How does this differ from what we might consider traditional yoga? And how is it practiced in India in this millennium?
If you look at the history of Indian spiritual thought, you could say that the Upanishad speaks about delight as being the cause of manifestation, but somehow the last 2 millennia India has forgotten that, and so yoga has come to mean abandonment of the earth. So all yogic solutions are otherworldly. That in the end you arrive at liberation, moksha, nirvana, and you abandon the earth. And if you look at all the yoga systems in India, they're about leaving earth as it is.
Can we just go back one moment? Because you spoke about the delight.
Yes.
Can you say that again? Because, of course, I'm all about delight,
Yes,
right?
Yes. So Sri Aurobindo and Mother are constantly talking. The Upanishad says that if you want to define the Godhead, the source, there is a triune term, Sat, Chit, Ananda. Existence, that is conscious force, that is bliss. So when you touch that awareness, you are in a state of delight. And let's not confuse delight with pleasure. It has nothing to do with pleasure. It is enjoyment in a totally different way. Yeah. It's a state of being, inhabiting that. So Sri Aurobindo and Mother's yoga is intended to arrive at that fullness of delight, but integrally, in the manifestation, converting the life divine into something that happens on earth, in earthly existence. Sri Aurobindo argues that humanity is evolutionary and transitional. And that evolution continues. When I first encountered this, I was 16 years old, and I said, but of course, finally, somebody has said something that makes sense. Because why would manifestation end with this really impossibly petty, pygmy human consciousness?
Yeah.
It makes sense that we have to evolve beyond ourselves. And Sri Aurobindo and Mother argue that with the manifestation of the mind in a material form, we have the power to be self-aware and self-conscious. And therefore, we can accelerate our own development. When the monkey evolved into the human being, there was no observing instrument. Today, with the mind, we can observe ourselves and we can accelerate. Yoga is a methodized effort at acceleration. All yogas are methodized. There is science of psychological growth. But your aim decides where you're going to end up. So the traditional yogas will give you liberation. You don't need Sri Aurobindo's yoga to be liberated. But Sri Aurobindo's yoga is not about liberation. It's not about achieving nirvana and moksha. It's about arriving at a state of consciousness and bringing it down and diffusing it into the earth atmosphere and changing what is possible in the material substance. So we have to find process. So Sri Aurobindo takes the Vedic idea of the mystic fire. There is a psychic fire. There is a inmost presence of divinity within you. And you have to awaken that. You have to awaken that fire and throw all your outer nature into that and transmute it into its highest potential, possibility, capacity, and increase and add what is not even possible for us human beings. I'm going to read a little letter where he tells you what he's saying.
Please.
This is one of his letters on yoga, because the letters of yoga are very, very important, because through the 30s he was writing letters up to 14, 15 hours a day to his disciples. And it was not just the words. The words represented an action in the consciousness of the disciples. So we should not only dwell on the words, we should see what the action was behind them. So Sri Aurobindo says, I am concerned with the earth, not with worlds beyond for their own sake. It is a terrestrial realization that I seek, and not a flight to distant summits. All other yogas regard this life as an illusion or a passing phase. The supramental yoga alone regards it as a thing created by the divine for a progressive manifestation and takes the fulfillment of the life and the body for its object. Now he'll tell you what the supramental is. The supramental is simply the truth consciousness, and what it brings in its descent is the full truth of life, the full truth of consciousness in matter. One has indeed to rise to high summits to reach it, but the more one rises, the more one can bring down below. No doubt, life and body have not to remain the ignorant, imperfect, impotent things they are now. But why should a change to a fuller life power, fuller body power be considered something aloof, cold, undesirable? The utmost ananda the body and life are now capable of is a brief excitement of the vital mind or the nerves or the cells, which is limited, imperfect, and soon passes. With the supramental change, all the cells, nerves, vital forces, embodied mental forces can become filled with a thousandfold ananda, capable of an intensity of bliss which passes description and which need not fade away. So it would be a permanent condition. Then he calls his yoga the yoga of transformation. And he tells you why. Transformation is a word I have brought in myself to express certain spiritual concepts and spiritual facts of the integral yoga. What I mean by spiritual transformation is something dynamic, not merely liberation of the self or realization of the one, which can very well be attained without any descent. So this is a reference to the traditional yogas. You can attain it. The yogas are perfectly good to give you liberation.
Right.
So Sri Aurobindo again, it is a putting on of the spiritual consciousness dynamic as well as static in every part of the being down to the subconscient. So when you hear Joy's poem about he's digging in hell, that's why it's necessary to do that. So Sri Aurobindo says that cannot be done by the influence of the self, leaving the consciousness fundamentally as it is with only purification, enlightenment of the mind and heart, and quiescence of the vital. Traditional yogas quieten the vital. They don't transform it. Sri Aurobindo says it means a bringing down of the divine consciousness, static and dynamic, into all these parts and the entire replacement of the present consciousness by that. So this is a definition of transformation. But he wrote many letters, and we have Malenka
Yes.
speaking about one of his letters.
To take everything as coming from the divine is a very good attitude to take if one can take it. Whatever happens has the sanction of the Supreme. This is a cause superior to everything. For the Bhakta, whatever happens is for the best, and he takes everything in that light. In yoga, difficulties are opportunities. No doubt hostile forces are recognized as hostile, but from a very special standpoint. Ultimately, all powers are from the divine, assisting in the work. They throw difficulties at us in order to test the strength. It is the divine that has created the opposition and sends you a defeat so that you may conquer hereafter. This is necessary in order to go beyond the ego's sense of its own responsibility. From Sri Aurobindo.
So, Dipti, it sounds to me like there is a system or a process for this work. Is that your Please tell me. Yeah.
Sri Aurobindo says there's no method in my yoga except to concentrate. This is a yoga of concentration. You have to, because the concentration brings you this focused power of consciousness into your body. Yes, that is the process, but it's a process of offering yourself, because no human will can do this yoga. You have to open yourself, you have to offer yourself. So it's a process of surrender, of rejection of the lower nature, and nature, and an offering of your higher nature. So in one letter that we just heard, Sri Aurobindo is talking about an individual process to an individual sadhak. But there are hundreds, thousands of letters. And one of the things that we really should focus on in his letters is his unbelievable sense of humor. So he's talking about incredibly profound and serious things, but he's humorous about them. So we're gonna share with everybody some of his humor. And I thought there is one very topical letter of his which talks about process. Now, because this is a yoga of transformation, what we need almost is to discover a process by which a change can be brought about in whatever least detail. And in that sense, Sri Aurobindo appreciates the scientific age and all the, not the technological necessarily, because they have made us too comfortable, but all the scientific discoveries of modern humanity are very useful because they give us process. They're all concerned with analysis of conditions and arriving at a viable and a achievable process. So here there is a disciple who writes to him. He's saying, oh, why can't I go to the higher consciousness? And, we human beings always want to take a shortcut. And so Sri Aurobindo is answering about process. It is not a question of can or cannot at all. All is possible, but all is not licit, except by a recognizable process. The divine power itself imposes on its action limits, processes, obstacles, vicissitudes. It is possible that an ass may be changed into an elephant, but it is not done, at least physically, because of a lack of process. Psychologically, such changes do take place. I have myself, in my time, changed cowards into heroes, and that can be done even without Yoga Shakti, merely by inner force. How can you say what is latent in a man or what is incurably absent? I have developed many things by yoga, often even without any will or effort to do so. For instance, philosophy. He says I wasn't a philosopher and I wrote philosophy, which were not in my original nature. I may even say that I have transformed my whole nature, and it is in many respects the opposite of what I began with. There can be no question about the power to change, to develop, to awaken faculties that were not there before. This power exists already, but it can be raised to an acme by being lifted to the spiritual plane. By the way, and this is so interesting because we are living in these COVID times where we are dealing with something that human consciousness is arrested and bewildered and doesn't find a solution. So I like this letter of Sri Aurobindo where he says, by the way, about the ass becoming an elephant, what I meant to say was that the only reason why it can't be done is because there is no recognizable process for it. But if a process can be discovered, whether by a scientist, let us say transformation or redistribution of said ass's molecules or whatnot by an occultist or by a yogi, then there is no reason why it should not be done. In other words, certain conditions have been established for the game, and so long as those conditions remain unchanged, certain things are not done. So we say that they are impossible, can't be done. If the conditions are changed, then the same things are done, or at least become licit, allowable, legal, according to the so-called laws of nature, and then we say that they can be done. The divine also acts according to the conditions of the game. He may change them, but he has to change them first, not proceed, while maintaining the conditions to act by a series of miracles.
That's absolutely delightful.
And there are hundreds of letters like that that are just so uplifting in their humor.
And I think we've got, I don't think, I know, we have one more interchange that is absolutely delightful
Yes.
and humorous about a boil.
Exactly.
A boil.